Hi, welcome to this Kaplan Masterclass about PESTLE and Porter's 5 forces. My name is Iryna Mcdonald and I'll be presenting this session to you. So what are we to find out about in this session? Our main objective is to think about the importance of environmental factors. All organizations operate in the environment that sometimes is hard to control or influence, and therefore it's important that our organizations are able to adjust to the environment that they find themselves within. And there are two particular ways for us to understand our environment. When we're going to be talking about macroeconomic environment, we're going to think about how PESTLE framework will help us to understand those factors. We're going to look at political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. When understanding the competitive environment, we're going to look at an approach called Porter's 5 forces to think about the factors that influence the degree of competition our organization is exposed to. So let's now consider how those factors work together. If we think about our industry environment, so let's start with the organization in the middle. That's our organization. Not only we need to understand what's happening within our organization, what are we doing, how well or badly we're operating, we need to think about the wider industry we find ourselves in. For example, what our competitors are up to, what our customers are expecting, what our suppliers are able to provide. But we also will need to consider the wider macro environment. Those are the factors that will affect all organizations in our country, in our economy. So all organizations will have to adjust to those macro environmental trends. Let's now consider those macro environmental trends. What will we need to adjust to? And a useful framework for analyzing macro environment is PESTLE. As you could see, PESTLE stands for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. When we talk about politics, we consider the actions of the government. What are the policies that the government will put in place? For example, those policies could do with international relationships. Think about the imports and exports. As a result of Brexit in UK, some companies found it so much harder to sell to their customers abroad or buy from suppliers that are from abroad. So political change could have a direct impact on our ability of the organization to trade, to receive its supplies, to generate revenues, and so on. But it's not only commercial entities that are impacted by governmental actions. Think about the public sector organizations. With the public sector organizations, they often operate in sectors such as healthcare or education. So politicians will decide how much money will be allocated to schools or hospitals. Many governments are now looking at tightening their purses, reducing the expenditure, so it will be harder for public sector organizations to operate within the reduced budget now available to it. Moving on to economic factors, we need to understand what is happening in the business cycle, what's happening in the economy as a whole. And currently, the word on everybody's lips is recession. Wherever you are in the world, you might have heard that your economy might be in recession as a result of COVID, for example. So during recession, we know that environment becomes more difficult for an organization. It's much harder for business to generate revenue because during recession, consumer spending falls, there will be few opportunities to make a sale. It's going to be harder to make that profit. But we should not assume that every organization is impacted by the trend in exactly the same way. So there will be organizations that thrive even at this difficult time of recession. A great example is discounters. When your disposable income is shrinking, you're looking for alternatives. Where could I buy similar things but cheaper? So if your organization is able to provide products or services on a budget at a lower price, you're likely to gain more customers who are looking for better value for money. We also need to think about inflation, and inflation could impact on our costs and prices. Inflation makes it more difficult for us to predict how much our materials will cost us in the future, or at what price we'll be able to sell our goods to customers. We should not assume just because our costs will increase because of inflation, it may not lead to us being able to increase prices to our customers. Our customers might have an alternative offering, and if we charge them too much, they're going to go elsewhere. We also need to think about interest and exchange rates. So interest rates will impact on cost of funding. The higher is the interest rate on a loan that your organization has, the more difficult it will be for you to service the interest on the loan, the fewer viable opportunities there will be for organization to invest. Exchange rates are particularly important for the organizations that trade internationally. If exchange rates are not stable, it's very hard to say what the exchange rate between pound, euro, dollar, or any other currency is going to be. It will impact on the company's ability to control its costs, to predict its revenues, and due to that uncertainty, it will be harder for the company to know whether that particular contract it might be entering into is likely to be profitable. Thinking about social factors, we need to consider demographics. What's happening in population? Oops. So with our population, we need to consider the key trends. For example, many countries are dealing with aging population. So as a result, companies are having to put more money aside into pension as the government stipulates. That will be the new requirement, but will also create opportunities for organizations to target the aging customers with specific products and services. For example, in UK, company like Saga was targeting all the population with the holiday offerings, with insurance offerings specifically aimed at their needs. Other social factors will include fashion. For example, in clothing, if you're one of those fashion-conscious students, you might consider what is the latest trend, what should I invest in terms of the new outfit. And companies like Zara have picked up on this trend. Zara is well known for releasing new items every few weeks in line with what celebrities might be wearing in line with what's happening on the catwalk. So if our customers are very fashion conscious, being able to respond to changes in fashion quickly gives us an edge over the rest of our industry. We also need to think about the lifestyle preferences. And for example, the healthy lifestyle has become very popular. People are much more conscious about the types of products they consume. Fast food chains might be struggling in places because customers are reluctant to eat foods containing a lot of sugar, a lot of salt, a lot of fat. But healthier cafes have become much more popular. In your cafe, when you buy a coffee, you might get varieties of different types of milk to make sure that any lifestyle preference could be accommodated for. With technological factors, technology is changing very rapidly, and it's very likely that in every exam, some technological change will be incorporated. So examiners very keen on all organizations, whether public, private sector, or charities, to use internet. As a minimum, we need to think about our website. Is our website interactive? Are we able to connect with our customers through the website? Is it providing enough information to meet our customer needs? Because website has become the face of your organization. If your website isn't well structured, or if it's difficult to find your website on Google, your organization is unlikely to get many customers. Data analytics will help us to make sense of the information organizations collect. I know you'd say that always organizations have collected information, but they haven't always made good use of that information. So data analytics will help us to see those hidden trends in customer behavior in our own operations that will help us to improve efficiency, that will help us to run better. Techniques like big data analysis will help us to become ahead of our industry. Finally, we need to think about the use of robotics and automation. If you are working for a manufacturing organization, you might notice that use of robotics is already widespread, let's say in car manufacturing, and more automation is likely in every sphere of organizational functioning. Okay? So, for example, you will have systems that will automatically send email reminders to your customers. Technology is getting smarter and is able to do more and more of those everyday tasks that previously used to be done by a person. Moving on to environmental factors, every organization will need to consider how it impacts on its environment. Many companies will have corporate social responsibility policies or CSR policies that will consider what impact our organization will have on its environment. For example, things like CO2 emissions that will lead to global warming and climate change. Companies are thinking about the use of natural resources, for example, use of water. As many places in the world this year have experienced drought, companies need to act more responsibly in the way they utilize that precious resource. Companies also think about reduction in pollution they generate. Some organizations might have updated their vehicle fleet. Instead of diesel engines, maybe their vehicles are now based on or have the engines that are based on electricity or hydrogen engines. So electric cars seem to become considerably more popular in the last few years because they might be cheaper to run in the long term, as well as they minimize pollution generated. Finally, in terms of legislations, important thing to remember that every organization, irrespectively of the industry, sector, the type of product or service it provides, will have to follow the law. So in every country in the world, we need to think about employment legislations. We need to make sure that we treat staff fairly. As a minimum, we need to think about sick pay. We need to think about holiday pay to our staff as stipulated in legislations. Every organization will have health and safety responsibility. We need to make sure that we provide a safe working environment to our staff. We will need to put safeguards in place to reduce accidents in our workplace. And finally, we need to make sure that we look after data that is shared with us, whether it's data about customers or data about employees. If we do not keep data secure, if our systems are hacked, we might be subject to fines, as well, of course, negative publicity. So think about data security. So that brings together our understanding of macro environmental factors using PESTLE framework. But let's take it a step further and also consider competitive factors. And here we're going to meet a theorist called Porter and his idea of 5 forces. So in trying to understand the degree of competition an organization will face in its environment, there are 5 key factors we will need to consider. So first factor will be barriers to entry, how easy or difficult it is for a new company to be set up in the industry. So how easy or difficult it is for a new company to be set up in the industry. So, for example, if I want to set up, let's say, a supermarket, I will need to have access to premises. I will need to have significant funding upfront to buy all the stock to equip my shop. I also need to understand my relationship with suppliers. So power of suppliers talks about ability of suppliers to demand. Of course, what would suppliers want to demand? They would want to have higher prices for the raw materials that they provide. To demand higher prices of raw materials. So if there is only one supplier of that material that I need, it's going to be very difficult for me because that unique supplier is likely to want to have a high price that I'll pay. But if I'm able to shop around and find alternative suppliers, I'll have a bit more bargaining room with my suppliers. I might be able to negotiate a better deal. Threat of substitutes talks about availability of alternatives that meet customer needs. So I need to realize that my customers have a choice. They can buy a product from my industry, or they could go and buy something entirely different. So every product has a substitute, and we need to understand that substitutes are not the same as competitors. Those are products and services that are provided by somebody else by different means. A simple example, let's think about making a phone call. You might remember those days long ago in your childhood when your parents would go and pick up a phone, a landline phone, to make that phone call. But nowadays, that's almost not heard of. We know that everybody picks up a mobile phone to make that call. So there are two industries that operated originally, the landlines, and over time, the landlines were substituted by mobile phones. So important to understand that often technology leads to creation of substitutes. Over time, there will be new ways of delivering particular products and service that do not yet exist. Power of customers talks about ability of customers to demand. And of course, what would our customers demand? They would want to have a lower selling price of the product or service. Lower selling prices for products and services. So what gives customer a chance to demand a lower price? For example, if this customer is significant to us, if they come and buy in bulk or buy a large proportion of our turnover, we'll be very keen to maintain that customer loyalty and therefore give them a discount. Finally, rivalry. So as the diagram suggests, all of the factors contribute towards rivalry, the degree of competition that the organization operating in that particular industry will experience. And what Porter has concluded that if you operate in a highly competitive industry, it will be harder for the organization to make a profit. Because if you're operating in a competitive industry, you are under pressure to reduce your selling price, to maintain your customer loyalty. Your costs might be difficult to control because you're trying to improve your product and service, so you have an edge over other companies in the same industry. So with higher costs and lower prices, your profit margins are becoming thinner, and that is making it hard for the organization to survive. So now we understood how Porter's 5 forces works together. Let's now look individually at each of those forces. So starting with barriers to entry, depending on the material you might be using, barriers to entry could have two names, either barriers to entry, or alternatively, it could also be referred to as threat of new entrants, indicating that how difficult it is for the new entrants to get in, and the fact that new entrants coming into the industry might create a threat, a difficulty for the organizations that are already there. So what are the factors that we need to consider? The first factor is the capital requirements. So the upfront costs of setting up a company in the industry, to set up a supermarket, to set up a car manufacturer, I will need to invest significant money upfront into the premises, into technology. Not every company would be able to have that much money at the start of the business. We need to think about ability to achieve economies of scale. And that refers to my ability to reduce costs with volume. So if I'm a car manufacturer and if I'm using my car factory intensively, I'm making millions of cars, that means I'm going to be able to be run efficiently. I'm going to be able to spread the factory costs over the millions of cars, and that reduces the cost per car, makes me more competitive in the marketplace. I need to think about my brand. Do I have a well-known name? Because if everybody has heard about me, it's more likely that customers will give my product a try. If I'm not a known organization, new on the block, it's going to be harder for me to get my name out there. I will need to invest much more in a marketing campaign so customers are actually aware of my existence. Other barriers might there be, for example, patents. If I have certain know-how that's exclusive to me, that will stop others from using my idea and therefore prevent competitors from producing a similar product or service. Access to distribution channels could also present a barrier. For example, if I want to sell my products, but I'm struggling to get a contract with the supermarket, so struggling to get a contract with the supermarket, I may not have the ability to then sell the volume of products that I want on my own. For example, if I'm a manufacturer of a bottled water, I have a choice. I could establish lots of my own shops selling the water, but that's likely to be very expensive and difficult. So unless I get that contract with the supermarket, my business is likely to fail, as other means of selling my product are simply not commercially viable. Finally, we need to consider governmental policy. Some governments may be very keen on protectionist measures. They might be protecting the local manufacturers, local companies, and making it difficult for foreign companies to come in by imposing tariffs or extra administrative regulations on those new companies trying to break into the industry. Progressing to power of suppliers. We said power of suppliers is to do with the ability of suppliers to demand higher material prices. Here, I need to consider how many suppliers are out there. If the supply is unique, and they will be the only ones with that product, then I might have to pay over the odds for that supply. If we look at the current affairs, currently there is a shortage of the microchips. Microchip shortage. And microchip is an essential component of many electronic devices, including cars. So car manufacturers are currently struggling to manufacture enough vehicles. They have great factories. They're able to make many of those cars, but unless they get access to the microchips, the car assembly is not complete. Many cars heavily rely on electronics. So without microchips, they are not able to operate. As there are so few manufacturers of the microchips, and microchips are unique, they are specific to a particular design, car manufacturers are finding themselves in a difficult situation where there is a lot of demand for the cars, but due to the problems in the supply chain, they're simply not able to meet that demand. We also need to think about our ability to switch suppliers. So if we are locked into a long-term contract with a supplier, that means without significant penalties, we will not be able to move to a better deal, even if the better deal is out there. So that will give power to the suppliers to stop us from shopping around. Let's now consider the substitutes. We talked about the fact that substitutes are alternatives available to customers. what else would our customers do if they wouldn't buy from us or anyone in our industry? And there are always substitutes available for every product or service. Students often say, okay, what about the basics, essentials? What if we need food? Everybody needs food to survive, but there are alternative ways of getting this food. So many of you, when you think about food shopping, go, okay, the natural first call for food shopping would be to go to a supermarket. But supermarkets are not the only place where you could buy your food. Think about going to the farmer's market. Nicer choice, fresher products, but often at a higher price. For those of you that are very green-thinkered and like gardening, you could consider growing your own, spending a bit of time on your allotment and growing your vegetables. I also realize that many of you say, okay, cooking is too much hassle, too much bother. Can I get my food already made so you could get a restaurant meal as an alternative to going food shopping? So for every product, for every industry, there are always alternatives, there are always substitutes. And therefore, we need to consider how likely is that our customers will choose alternatives rather than our products. So here we need to consider availability. Is it something that customer can actually do? So supermarkets are on every single corner, but farmers markets may not be that frequently available. The market might only be taking place on certain days of the week. They may not be open those hours that customers need. So therefore, the availability of farmers market is reduced. And as a result, more customers will go to supermarket instead. We also need to think about value for money. Coming back to restaurant meals, they are lovely, well cooked and fresh. But if we go out to restaurants every day, our food budget will run out pretty quickly. We may not make it till the end of the month. So overall, going to the supermarket to do your shopping gives you a better value for money, better quality price balance than only eating out in the restaurants. Let's now consider power of customers. We said that power of customers is about ability of customers to demand lower selling prices. Customers want better deals. Okay? So what gives customers this power? If the product is unique, it's going to be difficult for customers to demand a discount. For example, we all are familiar with Apple products, and we know that they are pricey because Apple has got a strong brand. Many customers want to have an Apple phone, an Apple tablet, or an Apple Watch. And as this product is unique, companies are able to charge customers more. But if you're buying something standard, for example, if you're going to buy some milk, looks exactly the same in whatever bottle it comes into. So if the milk is standard, you can shop around and find the price that suits your budget. Your ability to switch means you are able to come and buy from any provider. As we talked about with regards to food shopping, you can go to any supermarket. There is nothing tying you in, but not all providers are quite that relaxed. If we think about your telecommunication provider, many of you will have a contract with your mobile phone provider, and those contracts are becoming longer and longer it's very common for the contract to be at least 2 years long. So for those 2 years, you're locked in with your provider. You're not able to switch even if a better deal comes along. We need to think about how big the customer is in relation to the company. As an individual customer, you are likely to be fairly small, as in when you go shopping to a supermarket, you'll be one of millions of customers. But corporate customers tend to have larger contracts, and as a result of the volume of the purchases, they will be a more significant customer. They will negotiate better discounts than you would be able to achieve as an individual. And focusing on those corporate customers a little bit more, we need to think about how profitable our corporate customers are. Because if our corporate customers are struggling to make ends meet, we may not be able to charge them that much. So a good example we need to consider here is, let's think about the manufacturers of airplanes and the airlines. So airline is our customer. We know that over the last year, the airlines have had a really tough time. It's still very difficult to fly anywhere, and therefore profitability of the airline industry is significantly reduced. But because they make little profit, that doesn't mean they stop buying planes. They still might need to have new aircrafts, but at better prices. So therefore, airplane manufacturers might be under pressure to reduce the prices of the aircrafts to make sure that the airlines can still afford those new planes. Because if your customers make very little money, they won't be able to pay over the odds for the products or services that you are providing. The final force is rivalry. So here we're thinking about the degree of competition in our industry. As we said, the greater is the degree of rivalry, degree of competition, the less profit a company will make. So we need to consider the number of competitors. If your organization is a monopoly, then life is much easier. You are able to charge a higher price, but in practice, monopolies tend to be regulated. So, for example, in my local area, there is only one provider of water, but it doesn't mean they could charge you £1,000 per drop. That wouldn't work. Government would normally step in those industries and regulate the prices set to make sure that the single provider does not abuse their power. If we do have competitors, we need to think about how big those competitors are. So we could have several large competitors. And if each of those competitors has a significant market share, they have significant presence in the industry, we'll struggle to match them, we'll struggle to create enough brand recognition, enough customer loyalty to withstand pressure from those competitors. If we have many small competitors, if the industry is very much dispersed, then it might be easier for us. As a bigger company, we will have more of a presence in the industry. Finally, the industry grows. The general idea is if we have a fast growth, as in the sales in the industry are growing very quickly, that will create more room for everyone. It's more room for everyone to boost their sales to achieve their growth targets, and that reduces competitive pressure. However, There will always be industries that are not growing. If we think about retail nowadays, yeah, it's a very difficult environment on the high street. Many businesses are struggling. So low rate of industry growth often spells troubles for the company. If the industry is shrinking, it's going to be hard for you to maintain your revenue if the overall industry is becoming smaller and smaller. So let's now conclude the session. Thank you very much for attending this masterclass on the PESTLE and Porter's 5 forces. I do hope you have enjoyed it, okay? And possibly it would be great to see some of you in my class, whether it's a virtual or physical class. My name is Iryna Mcdonald, and I hope we'll see each other shortly. Bye.